Good evening to you. For Taylor Sud, I'm Reagan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. A look at the headlines. Brazil begins proceedings to remove its president, Dilma Rousseff, from office. Argentina's president-elect, Mauricio Macri, presents his so-called team of good intentions. And it's not yet known if it's terrorism, but police say about 14 people are now dead after gunmen stormed a non-profit organization in the U.S. The details on these stories and more right now. We begin in Brazil, where the opposition's attempts to oust President Dilma Rousseff have taken a step forward. The Speaker of the lower house, Eduardo Cunha, has agreed to open impeachment proceedings against her. The petition was filed in September by opposition figures and a founder of Rousseff's leftist Workers' Party. They accuse her of illegally fiddling with government accounts to mask budget holes. Eduardo Cunha himself is also facing justice over corruption charges. And for further information on the implications of the impeachment proceedings, we head now to Rio de Janeiro. We're joined by João Ferez Jr., a professor of political science at Rio de Janeiro State University. Hi, João. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us. What steps can you tell us need to be taken now in order for the impeachment to succeed?
Well, there is a long procedure. As a matter of fact, I was just editing this list of things that have to be, done in order for the impeachment to go through. It's not an easy process, as a matter of fact, and there are a lot of veto points.
Can you tell us what will happen if the president is finally impeached?
What happens?
What will happen?
Yeah, the vice president becomes the president. In this case, in the case that we are now, in case this particular process is accepted and goes through and succeeds, it's finally voted and accepted by Congress as a whole, then the president, the current president, is removed and the vice president assumes the presidency.
It's interesting. How can it be that someone who's facing calls for his own ousting due to corruption charges, how does he have the power to oust the president?
Oh, as a matter of fact, this accusation, this process of impeachment is not due to corruption. It's due to mishandling, alleged mishandling of the public accounts, of the way that the budget is dealt with. But it has nothing to do with corruption, but with the administration of state finance.
Understood. Can you just tell us how long will this entire process take once it begins?
Excuse me?
How long would the entire process take?
How long the process will take?
Yes.
It's unknown. You will start in next year, and then because Congress enters a recess very soon. Around Christmas, and then it comes back. I think only in February. But if you see the bylaws of Congress, the whole process doesn't take a long time, but there are a lot of measures that can be taken that will postpone its final due date. So it's still uncertain how it's going to go through, if it will.
I guess my last question would be, what is the word on the ground? What is the public opinion of this? What are they saying?
It's very hard to know the public opinion on these matters because the media is very biased against Dilma. So if you accept the public opinion as what the big media publishes or televises, broadcasts, you will think that the public opinion is for impeachment. But I don't think that's a general opinion of people. So it's really there is a struggle for public opinion in Brazil too that goes together or at the same time that this political conflict is playing out in Congress and between Congress and the president.
Understood. João, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been a pleasure. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Moving on now, Argentina's president-elect Mauricio Macri has presented his cabinet at the Botanical Garden of Buenos Aires. He was accompanied by his next vice president, Gabriela Michetti, and by Marcos Peña, who will be his chief of cabinet. Macri has also announced that his first two trips as a president will be to Brazil and to Chile.
I committed to form the best team in 50 years, and I clearly believe that what we presented today represents that of a team of various people, of committed Argentinians. Argentinians with a demonstrated track record, Argentinians with good intentions, a team of good people.
As peace talks between the government and the FARC continue in Havana, paramilitarism remains a concern among victims and social leaders in Colombia. Telesur's Natalia Margarita has more from Bogota.
His relatives couldn't escape violence. 9 of them, including his grandparents, mother and father, were murdered by paramilitaries and state forces. Now, as William struggles to get back the lands that once belonged to his family and have now been taken over by an oil palm company, he faces increasing threats from paramilitaries.
The government knows where those paramilitaries are. The army knows that too, as they are the ones providing security to the company, and paramilitaries have even murdered people inside the company. So it is as clear as day that they know each other. But we are the ones suffering the deaths and the fear.
In the wake of the peace negotiations, the FARC has brought up the issue of paramilitarism and the urgency of breaking the connivance of the army with those groups. That same connivance that victims such as William denounce, but the government negotiating team has denied in its latest statement.
The continuous call for changes and practices that have never been a part of, neither accepted within our institutions, and that are rather the product of an imaginary overcome years ago, is not contributing to peace expectations.
Different is the view of victims' organizations that believe peace construction is at jeopardy without a change in Colombia's military practices and the government's commitment to dismantle paramilitarism.
Military forces in Colombia have never fought paramilitarism. What is needed right at this moment is a change regarding the inner enemy. The FARC are the ones negotiating peace, so the military forces should be focused on tackling paramilitarism, but above all, on clearing and clarifying to society.
For some victims, paramilitarism poses a threat not just to the FARC members once they eventually demobilize, but also to rural residents that fear that paramilitaries will take over the spaces that the FARC will leave after a final peace deal. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto has entered the second half of his 6-year term. We go now to our correspondent Clayton Khan for a review of his first half.
It has now been 3 years since Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto began his 6-year term, which analysts, journalists, and public opinion polls consider to be awash and steeped with corruption, violence, poverty, and political repression. Now, recent polls released show a 60% disapproval rate by the Mexican population, which analysts argue has not been seen by any previous president in the last 100 years. Now, in a public event yesterday, which officially marked the half of his term, Peña Nieto acknowledged that his administration has faced challenges, but that the following 3 years will see the further implementation of the polemic so-called wave of 11 structural reforms that Nieto and his pre-party pushed through in the beginning of his administration. Now, it's important to note that the reforms, which saw the privatization of Mexico's national oil supply, as well as a change in labor rights for public school teachers, among other things, have provoked deep division and popular street protests, many calling the policies a new wave of neoliberal laws. This, combined with a steady increase in organized crime violence mixed with political corruption, which saw its most poignant case in the forced disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students, has prompted international rights organizations, including the United Nations, to severely criticize Mexico's handling of these issues. Finally, a mixture of internal policies and external markets has produced a weaker economy for many Mexicans, leaving 2 million more in poverty since the beginning of the administration to at least the year of 2014. This is Clayton Khan reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
Thousands of people have been asked to evacuate an area of over 6 kilometers surrounding the Momotombo volcano in the northern side of Nicaragua's capital, Managua. The Momotombo erupted for the first time in 110 years, spewing red-hot lava which authorities say is headed toward areas that are sparsely populated. On Tuesday, it started to emit gas and ash over 1 kilometer into the air. According to scientists there, the seismic tremor is increasing, and in the volcano's crater there are explosions every 4 seconds. The institute said activity could continue to increase. Over 30 delegates from the UNASUR are already in Venezuela ahead of this Sunday's parliamentary elections. This was confirmed by its Secretary General, Ernesto Samper. Samper also made a call for public participation in the elections.
I invite all Venezuelans to vote and not to stay at their homes, and whatever comes from the elections will be the true truth.
The Venezuelan diplomat Roy Chatterton explained the differences between an international observer and a companion.
For this electoral process of December the 6th, we have already done 19 audits, in which internal auditors of the National Electoral Council have taken part, but also external auditors and national observers. At the same time, for the November audits, we've had technicians and experts from other countries who have come to accompany us in the important certification process and auditing, which are the utmost guarantees for security and transparency in the voting acts in Venezuela.
The Venezuelan government rejected a letter addressed to the international community, signed by Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy and British Prime Minister David Cameron. The document criticized Venezuela's authorities and cast doubt on the peaceful environment for the elections. As President Maduro explained, the elections will not be won by violence, contrary to what the letter implies.
Thanks to Chavez, we don't have to fight a war with weapons, but we have to fight a different kind of war, the war of politics, and we must win with the only weapon we have, our conscience and votes. We'll win with votes.
President Maduro also announced that his government will investigate giant U.S. food company Kraft Heinz for allegedly tampering with production in the country. The order came after 3 Heinz employees denounced the company for unjustifiably paralyzing production lines, claiming that its factories can perfectly operate at full capacity to meet the country's shortage of certain food items, but that the owners do not want that to happen.
Right there is Heinz Company. I don't know what they are about. Tomorrow, as early as possible, whatever is going on with the Heinz Company will be reviewed. And if the managers are committing sabotage, here's the head of Venezuela Intelligence Service and he'll put them in prison right away. Enough of the bourgeoisie and all of the managers of that company.
Here's a look at what's coming up. A mass shooting in California in the United States, and police are on the hunt for the gunman. That story and more next.
Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Rod stars G1 and Claudia de la Cruz are Rebel Diaz, hip-hop activists positioned within a history of political resistance through music. And you don't stop. They invite young people to express themselves about their social struggles. And you don't stop. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. Caracas, Havana, Mexico, Quito, Washington, wherever the newsmakers will be there. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
At least 14 people are dead and another 17 injured at another mass shooting in the United States, this time at a non-profit organization in San Bernardino, California. At least 3 gunmen opened fire at 11 a.m. local time at the charity that works with developmentally disabled people. Reports are that the men were dressed in military clothing and escaped the scene in a black SUV. International terrorism has not yet been ruled out. This shooting comes just 1 week after 3 people were killed at a Planned Parenthood health clinic in Colorado. It's a case of mistaken identity for one inmate at the Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba. That's according to U.S. officials. The man, Mustafa Al-Aziz Al-Shamiri, he had been held there for the past 13 years, was suspected of being an Al-Qaeda courier and trainer. Officials said that although Al-Shamiri did fight for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, they believed him to have held a much more important role in the organization. He's been held at Guantanamo for over a decade, considered to be too dangerous to be released. However, a trial against him was impossible considering the lack of evidence. In the British Parliament, Prime Minister David Cameron has convinced members that joining the war on Daesh would significantly expedite the objective of ending the threats they continue to pose. The action decided on will soon be implemented. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused him of rushing into war without a viable plan and endgame. During the parliamentary session, however, there were calls across the floor for an apology from the Prime Minister for referring to those opposed to his plans as terrorist sympathisers.
The Prime Minister's attempt to brand those who plan to vote against the government as terrorist sympathisers both demeans the office of the Prime Minister and, I believe, undermines the seriousness of the deliberations we're having today. If the Prime Minister now wants to apologise for those remarks, I'd be happy to give way to him to do so.
Russian relations with Montenegro are under threat. This comes as NATO has extended an invitation to the Balkan country to join its alliance. Just recently, there were violent protests in Montenegro as thousands were against the possible NATO membership. Protesters had demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Milo Djukanovic. NATO and Russia have been at odds since the March 2014 annexation of Crimea in eastern Ukraine. Russia said that if Montenegro joins the NATO alliance, there would be retaliatory consequences. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan has lashed out at Russia's claims that they buy oil from the self-named Islamic terrorist group Daesh. This comes as Russia's defense ministry claims that it has proof that the Turkish president and his family are beneficiaries from ISIS's illegal oil smuggling.
No one has the right to slander Turkey by accusing it of buying oil from Daesh. Turkey has not lost its value so much as to buy oil from a terrorist organization. I said this in Paris as well. Those who slander Turkey need to prove it. If they can prove their allegations, I will not remain in my post as the president, even for a minute. But those who make these slander should not remain in their posts either. This is what an honest politician would do.
Over 500 institutions have committed to making the transition from fossil fuel dependence to cleaner and renewable energies. That's according to environment organizations 350.org and Divest Invest. A small group of activists in support of fossil fuel divestment were accompanied by Marshallese poet and activist Kathy Jetnil-Kajiner at the COP21 summit in Paris. The 500 institutions they represent account for over $3 billion in assets. COP21 summit president Laurent Fabius said that time is of the essence.
My message is absolutely clear. We must speed up the process because we have much work to do. Compromise solutions must be found as fast as possible. The heads of state and government leaders gave us on Monday an unambiguous mandate. We must succeed and do whatever we can to succeed.
Here now is a brief look at other news stories around the world.
5 members of Air France who had been accused of violence during strike action appeared in court to hear the date of their hearing. It's been set for May 27, 2016. Their co-workers demonstrated outside the courtroom along with members of the CGT union who called for a day of strike. Vietnam and the European Union have signed a free trade deal which will result in significant reductions in tariffs on goods entering both markets. Ratification of a legal document is set to be completed in a few months, and the agreement should commence by 2018. The Black Mamba's anti-poaching unit, made up of unarmed, all-female team of trained experts, first started off as an experiment, but has been successful in protecting South Africa's rhino population. The team patrols the borders of the reserve looking for illegal entry points and also reports any suspicious activity. And South Africa's President Jacob Zuma met with Chinese Premier Xi Jinping this week. The two leaders discussed boosting bilateral ties, which had already doubled trade between the two countries to 19 billion in 4 years by 2013.
IAAF President Lord Coe says that there was too much power vested in too few people within the organization. He said this during a session with Britain's Parliamentary Culture, Media and Sport Committee. Now, Coe's predecessor, Lamine Diack, as well as the IAAF's former doping chief, Gabriel Doll, are under investigation over allegations that they accepted massive bribes to cover up positive doping tests. Coe said that he will put things in place to efficiently tackle these issues in the future. Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, that's where you can find us for more on these and other stories. And for extended coverage of developing stories, you can join us on our website, telesultv.net/English. For Telesul English, I'm Regan Nevins. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.